The second one, maybe. And I called the other speakers, so they will come into the platform. Okay, we have 5 minutes to start.
Yes, there's 5 minutes. And I will mute everyone, just each speaker just open the microphone. Fine.
Yes.
Just please, each of the speakers turn each one by one, turn the unmute and begin the speaking.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Alhamdulillah.
I am in. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum, Mahran. How are you? Fine?
You're fine. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Great.
So before we start, please unmute your mic, all of you. We have also Emmanuel Mawatwi from Zambia. He is the president of ICOM Zambia. Welcome. Okay. Good morning, good evening to everybody. I'm very pleased to meet you again for the second day of the International Virtual Conference of Museums in Group 5, which is dedicated to the Arab world. And the theme of this group is Diversity of Arab Civilization Through its Museums. And for the second day, we have a keynote speaker and 6 speakers from different countries, Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Mongolia, and Iran. And so as not to lose a lot of time, so as to let a lot of time for the discussion, I will go directly to the program, and we will start with our keynote speaker, Dr. Okasha Dali. He is the head of acquisition at Qatar University Press, and he has a PhD from the Institute of Archaeology in London in Cultural Heritage. He was a project director of the Qatar Sudan Archaeological Project with Qatar Museums. He was also director of projects at the Foundation for Science, Technology and Civilization in the UAK. And he reviewed, edited, and translated many works in archaeology, history of science, cultural heritage, museums, and studies in both English and Arabic. He taught history of ancient Egypt, ancient Near East, archaeology, cultural heritage, history of science in Islamic civilization in the UAK, Egypt, and Qatar. He's a member of about 20 different international cultural heritage associations, including, of course, ICOM and ECOMOS, and also now he is a honorary researcher fellow at the Institute of Archaeology in London. His presentation will be about Arabs discovering their own heritage. So, Dr. Okasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dahmali, and I'd like to thank Dr. Assam Najdi as well for your very kind invitation. Having attended the sessions yesterday, I just wish we had more of them. I've been to Azerbaijan, for example, but I wasn't aware of all these problems that the cultural heritage sites there suffered under the Armenian occupation. So thanks to Dr. Shiri yesterday, it was very informative. And I just wish we'll have more of these meetings. My talk is actually titled Arabs Discovering Their Own Heritage, with the view to set the record straight. People, even in the 21st century, still believe that the reason there is a lack of interest among Arab audiences in heritage in general and in museums special, and the lack of funding that follows that lack of interest is due to the old misconception that Arabs and Muslims are not interested in anything pre-Islamic. And worse than that, it has been widely, unfortunately, also thought that a lot of destruction of monuments took place in the hands of people like Taliban, for example, 20 years ago or more in Afghanistan. And it gave the feeling that most destructions will be or had been carried by people with Arabic or Islamic views that these are against Islam or against Arab cultures. My published research, which took me 10 years, had actually shown quite the opposite. We have had a long history, long sustained history in Islamic culture and Arabic culture of interest in the past. All of you would probably be familiar with Arab poetry of the Jahiliyyah period or before Islamic period. And even in early Islam, nearly every poet starts his poem with these famous descriptions of deserted houses of his beloved or monuments nearby, and also created a genre in Arabic literature called Adab al-Adira or Diyarat, visits to monasteries by Muslims, not Christians, produced fantastic amount of poetry and poems dedicated to the events that took place during their visits to these monasteries. And these are, of course, old ancient monasteries. My published research had actually shown existence of hundreds of manuscripts unfortunately have not been edited and studied. This is one of our problems in archaeology, that shows medieval Arab scholars writing scientifically in many instances on ancient monuments, not just in Egypt, but in Iraq, Syria, and even Iran as well. So first point I'd like to make is, please remove from your head any thought that the study of archaeology and interest in museums is alien to Islamic culture or Arabic culture. So this is the first thing. The second point is, people might as well ask, what does this interest, what was the reason for this interest in the past, and how can we revive it now in the future, which is exactly the useful thing to do. Well, reasons for medieval Arab scholars' interest in the study of the past are numerous. First of all, in Quran, there are about 15 verses that entice Muslims to study ancient cultures. They are very well known. Again, I refer to them in my published book, Egyptology of the Missing Millennium. 15 ayahs in Quran at least that goes on these lines. But there are practical reasons as well. If you are a chemist in Iraq in the 10th century, then you wanted to study chemistry, then you're told to gain knowledge, proper knowledge of alchemy, you have to go to the land of alchemy, which is Egypt. And many of Iraqi scholars like Abu al-Qasim al-Iraqi and before him Ibn Wahshiyah and others actually flocked to Egypt to study from its temples' walls the secrets of ancient alchemy. They did this properly. I mean, it wasn't just a question of fantasy. We have local groups of alchemists in Egypt as well, having weekly seminars in which they would discuss ancient Egyptian knowledge. They believed they could gain from the studying of the temple inscriptions, and many of them did actually leave us evidence to their interest in deciphering ancient Egyptian, to the point I came to the conclusion in my research that though we are grateful to Champollion in 1822 for deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphic at last, indeed he built some of his own work and findings on, quite logically, on previous works of Arab scholars like the Nun al-Misri in the 9th century, Ibn Wahshiyah in the 10th century, Abu al-Qasim al-Iraqi in the 15th century, etc., etc. And some of these people successfully deciphered and came to the correct knowledge of many ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic signs, giving the correct phonetic value, and even understanding the difference between phonographs and monograms. It's a very detailed issue of deciphering process that I already explained in my book. So this is the first practical reason. Second practical reason is it has been widely known that the ancients left fantastic amount of scientific knowledge, that if you can enter into their mindset by understanding the language they left behind, then you can actually revive that science and build on it. And Ibn Wahshiyah, for example, in his famous book, Al-Filah al-Nabatiyah, on the Nabatean agriculture, he said that in the beginning of his book, he said he translated this from ancient Iraqi sources, specifically to teach us how to use their vast advanced knowledge in agriculture. And indeed, some of his ideas are revolutionary, even in terms of the 21st century knowledge of agriculture. And the same goes to Egypt as well. The interest was obviously to learn. And I give in my books very interesting examples of 10th century scholars ascribing to ancient Egypt advanced scientific knowledge that actually now when you think of it, you think it must be fantasy. For example, the 10th century writers thought that the ancient Egyptian had a system of lighting the cities using solar system in the night. You heard that China is now doing something like setting up huge mirrors to reflect the sun or something like this to light the cities in the nights. Some of these things, as I say, it sound really fantastic. The famous lighthouse of Alexandria was supposed to have been topped by a mirror that's 3 meters wide and served as a telescope, so you can see the enemy's ships coming from the other side of the Mediterranean. And if you realize your ships of enemies coming to attack Alexandria, the mirror has another function to reflect the sun rays and direct it onto these oncoming ships and burn them in the middle of the sea. A great early warning system, the defense system. I know this sounds like fantasy, but if a 10th century scholar ascribed that to ancient Egyptian, it's only to show they also talked about robots in ancient Egypt, how ancient Egyptian managed to use robotic statues to open huge doors and operate machinery, etc., etc. What does this have to do with our interest in museums now? This is very important because if you want Arabs to be interested in the idea of museum building and spending on museums, you need to remind them that there is a history of collection and interest in collecting in their own past. I mentioned a very interesting example in my book of the famous Caliph Omar ibn Abdul Aziz, the 5th Caliph Islam. That's the 1st century of Islamic history. Now, he's one of the strictest, we could call fundamentalist caliphs in Islam. He was so fundamentalist that he would not even buy new clothes for himself, fearing that he might waste the money of the state on himself. He wouldn't even put lights in his room in the evening in case that wasted the money of the state on lighting his room in the evening. And yet, he was very happy to show his guests when they came to him objects collected from Egypt and from other cultures in Syria and Iraq, quite proudly of these. So it's interesting how and Ahmed ibn Tulun, another famous fundamentalist ruler in Egypt, he's very strict religiously speaking, was so interested in these that he issued the first decree to protect Egyptian monuments and insisted that anybody excavating should be accompanied by an official from his government. But he used to spend quite a lot of time visiting ancient monasteries in Helwan to the south of Cairo, and is believed to have been actually buried or wanted to be buried when he died in one of these ancient monasteries. So nowadays, when we build museums, we build them on Western style. You see the British Museum style, and we bring them to our land. That looks like an alien copy and paste sort of architecture. And you put barriers between the visitors and the museums, not just ticket barriers, but all sort of mental and physical barriers that put people off visiting the museums. While my idea had always been, having worked in museums most of my life, that the museum should be like a public space. Anybody walking outside can just walk in, doesn't have to worry about tickets or anything, enjoy himself or herself, visit the collection, sit down for a meal or coffee, meet friends. We did something quite remarkable in Petrie Museum, which is part of the Institute of Archaeology in the University College London. We opened our door to the Arab communities, and the Moroccan group of Moroccan women association in London came regularly to even help us redesign ancient Egyptian jewelry. Thousands of them we have in the museum, and we opened it for wedding. I can't remember what was the couple from Sudan or North Africa. And that just gave the example that the museum is hospitable, warm, welcoming people. There is no formalities. But I have a feeling, and this is my plea to all of you working in museums, please ensure that your museum environments are friendly and warm, and people don't have to fear because of this, the architecture, because of the regulation, that this is out of bound for them. Now, I don't want to go on this for too long because I'm aware of time, and I'd like to leave the space for people to ask questions later. But I just like to come to another point, which is a study of these medieval Arabic manuscripts is yet to happen. I paved the way, and I'd like younger generations to come and take up the challenge of studying these medieval Arabic manuscripts in order to reconstruct properly some of our own lost heritage. Arabs are given credit for preserving Greek heritage. Scientific Greek knowledge was preserved by Arabs, translated into Arabic, and later translated into Latin. Now, something similar like this actually happened in medieval Arabs regarding the local Arabic scientific knowledge, but also monuments. I have given examples of ancient Egyptian monuments preserved in some of these medieval Arab manuscripts and completely lost to us in Egyptology or archaeology. I gave examples of stela, of inscriptions, etc., etc. So, just simply to conclude, is there is a continued interest in Arab and Islamic culture, in ancient past, in the study of that past, in taking great deal of pride in their own heritage. And this is another thing that people often forget. We have great faqih, or scholars of Islamic jurisdiction, who dedicated their lives to the study of ancient Egypt, leaving several books with the titles History of Ancient Egypt, Pyramids of Ancient Egypt, like the famous Al-Idrisi, not the North African Idrisi, but another Egyptian called Abu Ja'far al-Sharif, Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz al-Idrisi, who died 1251 AD in Egypt and left behind among his books a fantastic study of the Egyptian pyramids called Anwar Ulawi al-Ajram fil Kashf an Asrar al-Ahram. Even the title links the pyramids with the stellar system, with what we now call astroarchaeology, and in its 7 chapters of fantastic study of the theories behind the pyramids and how they were built, why were they built, how they were built, who visited them, etc., etc. And dozens of these manuscripts still there, waiting for young scholars to work on them in order to reconstruct that part of our heritage. And it's left for younger people like you to take up that challenge. I just mainly wanted to pave the way for that. One last point. When Arabs conquered, or Muslims conquered lands, unlike the Western conquerors wanted to hold the monuments of this land they conquered back to their land, like Italian Romans did with Egypt. They took temple gates, they took columns, they took obelisks, and you've seen them now standing in Italian squares in Rome and other places, and in France as well. Muslims didn't have to do that. They respected the existing cultures. They wanted to study them and take interest in them. It would make no sense to them to take these obelisks back to where they came from, because they weren't going to go back anywhere. They're here to settle. This is their new land. They settled here. They didn't have to take this obelisk from Egypt somewhere else. And so this is an important point, why you see obelisks from Egypt everywhere in the world, but when the Muslims conquered Egypt, they didn't take anything out to anywhere. They collected objects like everybody else collected, like this Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, I said, who sent gifts from Egypt, including some of these artistic objects, which he was so proud to show his guests. So just a brief note that please remove from your head any thought that in Islamic culture, there is no room for interest in the study of the past or the interest in museums. Quite the contrary, we just need to remove the dust from all these materials that we already have in our great museums and archives and in manuscript collections. I better stop here. I think I went 3 minutes more than my allocated time, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, dear Ukasha. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting, especially in the idea of refuting the widely held perception that they are not interested in the study of their own heritage. And also, you mentioned a very important point, which is related to museums. So the architecture of our modern museums, did we respect our civilizations when we are concepting new museums? If I want to let this for discussion if you want, because we have this problem in general, because the curator of museums, he's in a dilemma. He wants a functional building, and at the same time, he should respect their own heritage, especially in the design of the Islamic architecture traditions. So the second speaker, I think he is trying to connect. He's from Syria, Dr. Mahmoud. He has some problem with the connection in Syria. I will ask Dr. Adila if she is ready, or we can go to our colleague Osama.
Yes. Hi. Marhaba, Sharqi.
You are ready? You are ready?
Yes, I am ready.
So, okay.
Let me try to share the screen with you. I think this is it, right? Can you see it?
It's good. I will present you before you start. So,
Please,
Dr. Adila Laidi Hania, she is the director of the Palestinian Museum, Director General of Palestinian Museum. He has a cultural studies from PhD in cultural studies from George Mason University as a Fulbright scholar. And she obtained an MA in Arab studies from Georgetown University. And her museums won in 2019 Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And she is also the founding director of the Khalil Sakakini Cultural Center. It's an NGO in Palestine. She published several essays and books, including the artist biographies. And she will give us today a presentation about the situation of museums in Palestine. So, Dr. Adila, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ustaz Sharqi. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, we are hearing you very well, and the presentation is very clear, so you can go ahead.
Tamam, thank you. I'm very pleased and honored to be speaking with you today. My name is Dr. Adila Laidi Hania. My museum is located in the village of Bir Zayt, which is 20 kilometers north of Jerusalem. So I usually do a presentation just straight about our museum because it's very characteristic, but I thought I would give a very quick introduction at the beginning about the situation of museums in Palestine so that you know where we are coming from. So the first slide is an aerial image of our building. Our building opened in 2016, and you can see it at the top of the image, at the top left. It was built by the Irish architects Henihan Peng, and all the land in front, this is a garden that belongs to us also, which has vegetation from all over Palestine. And the buildings that you see to the left, these are the buildings of Bir Zayt University. So the University of Bir Zayt are our neighbors, but we are not related or connected to Bir Zayt. Anyway, so next slide, Right, so let me give you just a quick overview about the situation of museums in Palestine. As you know, Palestine is under occupation, under Israeli occupation. Some territories have come under occupation in 1948 and some others in 1967. In 1993, there were some peace agreements with Israel, and the place where we are located came under partial autonomy, okay? So the first museum opened in Palestine in 1901, and it was established by the empire that used to rule Palestine at that time, which was the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire inaugurated a museum in Jerusalem in 1901, and they ran it because, as you know, there was the whole history of the museum building during the Ottoman period with the famous Osman Hamdi Bey. So when the British came and invaded Palestine after the end of World War I, they took over the Ottoman Museum, and they started establishing their own museum, which was supposed to spread the message of the Balfour Declaration that this territory was going to become the state of Israel. And so eventually they opened their own museum, which is now known as the Rockefeller Museum. So this is the top left picture, which is now the Rockefeller Museum right now. At the same time, in 1921, the Islamic authorities in Palestine established the Islamic Museum on the land of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's the museum you see on the top right, which has antiquities. But what I want to say is, before I go to the bottom part, is that the top left part, which is the Rockefeller Museum, which is supposed to be the official Palestinian museum, came under Israeli occupation in 1967. And the Israelis came and they took over the Dead Sea Scrolls and a lot of things having to do with Jewish religion. They took it and they put it in their newly established Israel Museum. So the official Palestinian museum is the one you see on the top left is actually under Israeli occupation. The one in the right-hand side, which is located in right next door to the Aqsa Mosque, is actually run by the Jordanian Awqaf, because the Jordanian government runs the Awqaf, the religious pious endowments in Jerusalem. And actually they run also the Christian ones. So at the bottom, we have examples of Palestinian museums. On the left, we have the Natural History Museum, which is a private museum located near the Bethlehem University, which is about the fauna and the flora of Palestine. And then on the right, you have the Museum of the In'ash al-Usra, which is actually a women's cooperative. And this is a good example of the majority of museums that you can find in Palestine. Most of them are small ethnographic museums because, as I explained, all of the Roman Islamic antiquities are in Israeli hands, okay? We do not have access to them, neither the Palestinian Authority nor anybody. So next slide. When our museum opened, we did a survey of Palestinian museums, which we have, and if people are interested, we can share it as a PDF. So the Palestinian Museum, our museum, is a proud member of ICOM and an active member of Arab ICOM, thanks to our friend Al-Sharqi Dahmali, and I was pleased to take part in the meeting of the Arab ICOM in Kyoto. In the good old days before the COVID. So our museum, what I need to explain, our museum is a non-governmental museum. It's a foundation. It's an NGO. We are registered in Switzerland. We were established by the biggest Palestinian development organization called Welfare. And as I said, we are located in Birzeit. We were very proud to win in 2019 to be one of the winners of the Aga Khan Award for architecture. So here you can see the building from the back, the building overlooking the garden. So let me go to the next slide. Thank you, thank you. This is an aerial view of the building. As Mr. Al-Sharqi very kindly mentioned, we won also the LEED award. We are the only museum in the Middle East that won the golden medal of the Green Building Council in the United States, the only building in the Middle East that has won the golden award. So I'm not going to explain what's entailed in this. So to begin quickly now, what do we have in this museum? We are still building our permanent collection because of all the issues that I mentioned. We do not have access to our antiquities. So therefore our museum decided to be a modern museum to focus on the 18th century onwards. So we have a number of artworks by Arab and Palestinian artists in our garden. We also have an art collection, we have a poster collection, we have an ethnographic collection. One of the innovative ways and creative ways to acquire collections, for example, is to do a crowdfunding campaign. So we got a major donation of an ethnographic collection, which was in exile in the US, and we did a crowdfunding campaign to bring it back. And this is an example of it, me and a colleague of mine in our collection room. And we plan to do more like this in the future to repatriate Palestinian collections that are in the diaspora. So the model of the museum is that our main work is to organize an annual exhibition. So we started, our first exhibition was about the city of Jerusalem. I hope you can see what's written on the left. We actually had 2 exhibitions on the city of Jerusalem. We also had an exhibition about Palestinian political posters. We organized the largest exhibition of Palestinian art ever held anywhere in the world. And we also organized the largest exhibition on Palestinian embroidery and Palestinian costumes. And we are ready to cooperate with any museum anywhere in the world to have our exhibitions visit your museum. Our current exhibition, which is actually going to open tomorrow, is called A People by the Sea in Arabic, بلد وحده البحر, narratives from the Palestinian coast. We were going to do the opening reception tomorrow, but we postponed that because one of our colleagues was actually assassinated by the Israeli army 2 days ago. So we are going to open the exhibition to the public without an opening ceremony, without an opening celebration. This is a historical exhibition. So it's not an art exhibition. It's not an ethnographic exhibition. It will show documents, videos, artifacts from the coast of Palestine. The coast of Palestine is now entirely occupied by Israel and by the state of Israel. There is hardly any Palestinian presence there, which was ethnically cleansed in 1948. So we did this exhibition to focus on the proud history of Palestine from 1748 until what happened in 1948. And hopefully we will be, through the coming year, we will be putting excerpts and organizing live tours where you will be able to take part. So that's for the exhibitions. That's work number one. Accompanying the exhibitions, we have a very, very active education program. You're all familiar with education programs. I will not discuss, but we work exclusively with governmental schools. So these are public schools and schools in refugee camps. These are the schools that we focus on, not so much the private schools, and we develop original material for them. We also have a very strong knowledge and research program. As you know, there is a problem with knowledge production and knowledge dissemination about Palestine because we do not have strong knowledge institutions, knowledge producing institutions. So we decided that the Palestinian Museum would be one. So we give grants. We organize academic conferences, and we have, in the whole year, we have talks and conferences with academics and with researchers about topics that relate to the exhibition of the year. So for example, last year, all our program was about Jerusalem. This year, all our program is going to be about the history of the coast of Palestine. We also obviously, well, it's not obviously, but we decided as part of our knowledge production to be active in producing books. So we obviously have catalogs, exhibition catalogs, but we also produce children's books and garden catalogs, and we produce periodicals and scholarly publications jointly with Palestinian scholarly institutions. Of course, we need to bring normal people, regular people into our museum. So we have a very strong public program where we have entertainment, like you can see at the top. We have concerts in our outdoor amphitheater. We have events for families, as you can see at the bottom. We have events for artists. It's very varied because we want to have people to come to our museum to attend an event, not necessarily to see the exhibition. So this way we can have more people come into our exhibition, into our museum. Now, besides the events and the periodical aspect of the life of the museum focused on events and conferences and exhibitions, we also have facilities that are more permanent, like the conservation lab. We have a paper conservation lab, the only one in our area, developed in cooperation with the British Library, and we hope to establish next year a textile conservation museum. We're waiting for the funding. Inshallah, we can get it. And so we develop a lot of paper material, and I will tell you what we do also with that paper. Because the majority of the audience of our museum is not in Palestine or cannot arrive to Birzeit, the Palestinian Museum developed an identity to be a transnational museum. So for example, the very first exhibition organized by the museum was organized in Lebanon, not on site. And this is the exhibition you see on top, which was an ethnographic museum organized in Beirut at Dar al-Nimr Museum. We also have our exhibitions online on our website. We developed also a VR experience for one of our exhibitions that you see at the bottom, shown in a refugee camp in Beirut. So our identity is as a transnational museum. So Another way to be creative as a transnational museum to disseminate the Palestinian narrative and to produce and disseminate knowledge about the Palestinian history, we have two major digital projects that all of you can go and visit now and bookmark and visit all the time. The first one is called the Palestinian Museum Digital Archive. The website is palarchive.org, palarchive.org, where we collect collections of archival material, audiovisual or paper. We do not keep it in the museum. We do not keep it. We just digitize it and upload it. And it's a wonderful look at the social history of the people of Palestine, the resistance and the achievements. But I emphasize that it's social history, or what we call history from below. So it's archives of families, of artists, of cooperatives, of schools, of universities, not official governmental archives. So this is why we call it history from below. Again, the website is palarchive.org. The other major website, which I urge you all to bookmark, is called PAL Journeys. PAL Journeys. This is basically an encyclopedia of Palestinian history online. Everything you ever wanted to know about the history of Palestine via documents, chronology, timeline, short articles in Arabic and in English. It's your reference website about Palestine, which we developed ourselves in cooperation with the Institute for Palestine Studies. We also have about 80 biographies of Palestinian personalities. Oh, finished. This is our museum from the back. In the garden. You will not believe that everybody is standing on an artwork. This is an artwork developed by Canadian artist Bob Gramsma. We're about 75 people, but we only have a fraction here showing. So we have our website. You can follow us on YouTube, on Facebook. We are extremely active. So what I wanted to show you by talking about my museum, the Palestinian Museum, which is a non-governmental museum, is how to do different museum work when you are under occupation. You cannot access a permanent collection. So this is one of the creative ways. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Adila. It was a good presentation, especially it's a very big effort, especially done by NGO in Palestine. And I know that you are working in some difficult situation, but the work done, it's something which is great. So please stop sharing your screen, and we will go to the
how
next.
do I do that? Oh, sorry, Hayu. Stop share. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you are welcome. So now we are going to Dr. Osama Abdelmajid. Our colleague is from Egypt. He holds a PhD degree in Museology from the Rijnwaard Academy in Amsterdam, in Netherlands. He is the founder of the Nubian Museum in Aswan, the General Director of Nubian Monuments Salvage Fund, and now he is the General Director of Children's Center for Civilization and Creativity in Cairo. He was a member of ICOM Executive Council from 2009 to 2016, and he was also Vice President of ICOM Arab from 2009 to 2019. He is also a UNESCO expert for Creative Cities Network, and he has many publications and articles. Now, today he will speak about Egypt museum scenario. So, Dr. Osama, the floor is yours. Please unmute your mic.
Can I share my screen?
We are seeing your screen, but not the PowerPoint file.
Now we see it.
Yes, we see it. Please press full screen. Okay, you can start.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Sharki, and thank the organizers of the meeting, Dr. Sharki Dahmali, and Dr. Assam from ICOM Emirat, and Dr. Muhammad Khan from ICOM Pakistan, to give me this opportunity to share with you in this presentation about the museum scenario in Egyptian museums. As a member of the High Commission of the new Egyptian Museums exhibition scenario, we have already a strategy to build a scenario for each of this new museum. First of all, we wish to avoid the stereotype of old museum scenario by building a specific character for each museum rather than suffering from the most of the old museum will similarly look at each other. I will give some example of the new museums and how we build this strategy in such museums. We will start by the Hurghada Museum that's already opened in February 2020. This museum was the first museum in the area of Red Sea. It was based on the new destination for the tourists. The area was very well known by the tourists who came to just for resorts. There is no any culture or museums in this area. So we built this museum to have a new destination for the Egyptian culture in this area. The museum was also one of the first museums based on the cooperation between the private sector and the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. The main scenario topic in this museum was based on the beauty of ladies in ancient Egypt in different periods, and the exhibition was based on this topic for the how ladies, ordinary ladies, high ranks, queens, and princes was used their beauty customs and cosmetics. The museum has many sections. Section for the specific domestic cosmetic, for ordinary ladies, for queens, and for the royal families. In this regard, we focused on the cosmetics and beauty. Plus, the museum also exhibits 10 objects from the high masterpieces of Tutankhamun collection as a temporary exhibition. The second museum in this regard was Baron Palace. The Baron Palace is one of the early 19th century palace in Egypt. Was built by Belgium Baron Ban. This palace was neglected for hundreds of years, and the palace has been turned into museum. And scenario was built on the area of the palace, area of Heliopolis. Heliopolis area, one of the new destination region in Egypt, was completely built in the beginning of the 19th century as a new urban in Cairo. This museum tells about the history of the Heliobus, and how the new urbans added a new urban area to Cairo in 1911. Sharm el-Sheikh Museum also was a new destination in the Red Sea in Sinai, the first museum to build in Sinai area. And this museum was based in the scenario in the relationship between human and fauna, humans and birds and animals. How the ancient Egyptians continued and build and create a relationship between the creatures like animals, birds, and what kind of this relation based on, and how the ancient Egyptian respects the nature from flora and the fauna. The museum exhibits hundreds of mummified animals and birds where ancient Egyptian was respect and continue to deal with such animals in respect and in consideration. The museum also has many aspects related to the human being and how the ancient Egyptian used the centurion and they used the buses through the ages and how it was built and established into the Greco-Roman period. We have established many new bus rooms, and also the museum has some contemporary exhibition of Tutankhamun exhibition. As for the local area and the rural area in Egypt, with some new museum has established, like the Museum of Kafr Sheikh in Delta. And the scenario of this museum was based on the cities, ancient city of this governorate, like Butu, and also tells about one of the main history of ancient Egypt, the battle of Horus and Set, where this battle has been taken away in the swamps of this area. And this was in the beginning of the Egyptian history, one of the myths of the Egyptian history. It was not very well recognized in museums before. The Royal Carriage Museum, this museum was already built in the 19th century, but it has renovated and has a new scenario. This one of the main carriage museum in the world. I think it would be the third carriage museum in the world. It was built in the period of Khedive Ismail, and its collection has a diverse carriage and its diverse use, plus the collection of horse sets and costumes of the horse riders. In April this year, Egypt had inaugurated the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization with the Pharaoh Parade. I think all over the world have seen live the Pharaoh Parade. It took place in Cairo from Tahrir Square to the new museum in Fustat. This museum, I think, would be one of the biggest museums in the area, telling about only one civilization. But the scenario of this museum was built on the idea of the ancient Egyptian contribution of the old science, architecture, science, medicine, religion, and costumes. The museum has a collection of all types of such kind of science, like chemistry, dyes, plus medical science. We have many medical elements and medical objects, and how the ancient Egyptian used it. The museum also has a specific gallery for the royal mummies, where it's exhibited in new display and in new atmosphere. We have two museums in Egypt, Cairo Airport, one in the Whole Tree. This kind of the museum could be maybe new, but it's a new destination to attract the travelers and the traveler of transit. The museums in small space, but it give a scope of all ancient Egyptian history in one capsule. The second one, it was in the whole tree. It's also dedicated for some area related for the ancient Egyptian religion. But we have already working on the new museums as well. The new museum already finished now. The museum of ancient Egyptian capitals. Now it's the new capital, but not officially open. It's scenario based on the ancient Egyptian capitals. We have 5 capitals represent the ancient Egyptian station, and from the idea of the changing capital through the periods. And some museums under development. We have the new museum of Greek-Roman in Alexandria, hopefully it will open next year. Muhammad Ali Palace in Shobra, Shim in Fayoum, and the special museum of Prince Muhammad Ali in Manial Palace, and King Farouk Resort in Helwan. And we have under construction some museums. The Aton Museum in Minya in Middle Egypt. It will be about the history of Minya, plus it will be focused on the Akhenaton area of the era in the area. And we have a new scenario. We are preparing for the new presidential museum, new capital, and the minister cabinet in the new capital, plus the new museum in El Alami. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Osama. Please stop sharing your screen. Now, it's really interesting to see you as a member of the museum scenario in Egypt. You are a member of this high commission. And what I find very interesting, maybe it can be a good example for other countries, is to try to make some small museum inside airports. It's a very good idea, because it will give an idea to not only foreigners, but only for citizens from this country who are living abroad, to see their cultural heritage if they don't have enough time to visit the national big museums. So now we are going to Mongolia with Miss Sanderv in Kanaran. Sorry if I did not spell it very well. She is a PhD candidate student at the Culture School, Mongolian National University of Culture and Arts, and she is former junior researcher in Mongolian Cultural and Art Research Institute, and she is going to speak about museology, the case of museums in Mongolia. So please, you can start.
Hello, everyone.
Please press full screen. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm pleasure to be here to talk about museology in Mongolia. Today, I'm going to speak about the post-socialist museology in case of museums in Mongolia. And this is my thesis topic. I researched how social changes is affected the museology and museums in Mongolia. It's the one of kind of museum evolution by social changes. I will say this social changes is how can they affect the museum presentation, interpretation, and social changes. Then applied theory, the social changes affected moral attitudes and changes ethical behavior, multicultural acceptance and penetration is integral part or preference for the new ethical dimension of the museum. If museum attach great importance to and become dependent on some correct action and correct presentation, the museum policy, planning, primary and orientation will be transferred. This is quoted by Edson. This is the general applied theory, but it's the very deep digging to the museum perspective in Mongolia. Then next after that, I divided the Mongolian museum chronology into 3 periods by status. The first is the Mongolia. It means the man who erected Mongolia, the king's period. It is 1921, 1923. The second one is the Mongolian People's Republic. It's the 1924, 1991. It's the social society. That time, the Mongolia was the social society. It's the one party ruled all of Mongolia. The next of that, the Mongolia, it's from the 1990s, 1992. It's the democratic Mongolia. It's the trade market Mongolia. It's the kind of to this modern Mongolian society. This period, these 3 periods, how they affected museums and museum visitors, museum presentations, and museum interpretations. The Mongolia, the king's period in 1921, 1923, the presentation and interpretations. During that time, actually, the museum started to be built in Mongolia. At that time, the old script institute, Soдар Бичгийн Хүрээлэн, it's the institute to collect all kinds of literary monuments and all sorts of interesting things from all countries, and to organize the so-called the find and museum will help people see how many. It's the first time to introduce museums from Mongolia. The collection preservations, since the founding of the institute, and organized work begin to find, collect and record masterpieces of the natural of their country, household items of the people, culture and historical rare monuments and present time. At that time, they worked collections divided into 2 types: the old things and new things. Old things is it's actually kind of the temples things and original things and old houses style. The new things is about the modern things, like the Cyrillic script, the modern household things is the like kind of this. The Mongolsky people's NPR in 1924, 1991, about the presentation interpretation at the museums. They actually they show the one party have to develop the social society, have the power about the Stalin and the one pen worshiping one man. The workers in the materialist worldview of socialist patriotism, proletarian internationalism, solidarity, and surrealism. This is the one of the socialist periods museum hall. It's from British Library 1950s in the State Museum of Mongolia. The Mongolia from 1990s is about the presentation interpretation of museum. There's about the display about the Mongolian national culture. We proud of their culture. The audiences they like to see this king's period and queen. And the interpretation is about to preserve the tradition of our statehood, history, and culture, to inherit our national culture to in descendants, to be proud of the Mongolian cultural heritage, history, and cultural monuments. But there's about the visitors' comments in socialist Mongolia and Mongolia. In sorry. Between 1924 and 1991, the visitors at the museum, they wrote the comments book. Here, the one of example is here wrote the, I will honestly take part of the affairs of developing the great state that was created by Sukhwater, who was the one of leader of the socialist revolution. They fulfill their first 5-year plan and show my academic success, and also want to show I want to succeed Papa's 5A class, but not in 1950 to 17. But in democratic period, the Mongolia 1992, pride of our country, appeared itself really great. The kids, students, the proud the Mongolia independent from this time. Also, they great the national culture, the popular 5C, grade P number 2007, 922. It's the same age as two periods in socialist and democratic Mongolia. The memory, the museum scenery, the retired workers, they said that about the memory, the museums, in socialist period, at that time, all Mongolians had set goals and are working, striving for something that what the great they do something. Everyone comes with the great desire to learn something new in museum, and also consider that exhibits of religious precious and rare. And children and young people swore to be pro-national flag when they became members of the pioneer collectivism and party, had high aspirations and great dreams. But in Mongolian period, from 1992, the sea museums business, they always talk about money, jewelry, and selling something. It's the very difficult period, Mongolia, because at that time Mongolia changes from socialist to democratic period. That time, the hungry strike, in Mongolia covered the hungry and workless, the people still started to live the open trade market. The learning everything is that the people were the poor. We had the street children. That typical Mongolian visitors of museums said like that first comments. And the second one is that treated with respect because they regard the museum as a sacred place for emperors. From this time, you can talk about the Genghis Khan and or Bogd Jabzandam, and everything is often the national cultures. We can talk about our proud things of Mongolian history. It means that time is that free talk about their culture. The analyzing of all this, we can assume that from explanations, interpretations of the one-party limited ideology, visitors permit an opinion about the development of country, fulfillment of the plan, achieving success, harmony, honesty, and labor. At that time, we had one party. All the government controlled what they display in museum. The one voice is afterwards in the museum that you should display here. You should say that the museum works like that this way. With this transition to market society, to the common mentality of people is permitted to do business, be proud of the Mongolia and proud of the history, culture of the Mongolia. And actually, another perspective, we can see this by this perspective, the open trade market. We started proud of the national culture and history of Mongolia, but another way is that we still limited voices in Mongolia. The museums, only limited what they want to show people. The people cannot display what they wanted by people. So we still limited way. The conclusions, the museum which errors that and developed in our country in halls, including exhibition halls, it still shows the representatives of its nature, political, history, local characters, national ecology, paintings, music, and religion. At the same time, the materialistic view of the world, socialist patriotism and proletariat of the world, and the voice of the educating workers according to the principle surrealism, and recently changed this cures the heritage of the tradition, statehood, history, and culture, inherit the national culture to the descendant, and to be proud of Mongolian culture, heritage, historical, and cultural monuments. The museum was under control, limited to become a party ideological weapon and political voice for the most of its development. Since in 1990s, a democratic open society has been formed in this country, which allows freedom of religion and pluralism, but political voice still plays an important role in the museum. And the museum and specialists show not what they are audience wants, what they themselves want. This means that it has not yet become museum representing and interpreting culture, achieving pluralism, diverse and colorful voice of community. Therefore, museums need to increase their responsibility to nature, society, and human development, as well as the participation of social groups and people in the museum. So there's my brief speech about my dissertation's work. Thank you for your attention. Let me know if you have questions and comments by email, and ask my chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear colleague. Please stop sharing your screen.
Okay, I will try. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for this wonderful travel into Mongolian civilization. And as you said, it seems that really you are proud of your civilization, and this is the role of museums. Museums should let people to be proud of their civilization. Thank you for your presentation. And now, hopefully, we have now our colleague from Syria who succeed in coming into a platform, Dr. Mahmoud Hammoud. He is the former Director General of Antiquities and Museums in Syria, and he has a PhD of History and Archaeology of the Ancient Near East in Syria. He is an archaeologist at the General Directorate of Antiquities and the Museums since 1994. He was the Director of Antiquities in Damascus countryside, and also he is the Chief of the Archaeological Encyclopedia in Syria since 2014. He directed many excavations and survey expeditions in Syria, and he is editor of Mahd al-Hadarat magazine, and he has many publications and more than 60 studies and articles. Now he will give us a presentation about, it will be a brief look at the reality of Syrian antiquities during the war. So Dr. Mahmoud, the floor is yours. Open your mic. Please open your mic because we don't hear you.
Okay, good afternoon. Yeah.
Afternoon, we are hearing you.
Okay, yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank all the organizers of this conference. Thank you very much. And I am very sorry. I apologize that I joined you a little bit late because, you know, the communication is not so good. My presentation, you know, in Syria, there are more than 10,000 archaeological sites dating back to different ages, starting from the prehistoric times where there are sites dating back to 1.5 million years on the years to the late Islamic era. Before the war, there were more than 140 archaeological missions in Syria, including 1 foreign missions from various countries of the war, from Japan and Australia in the east to America and Canada in the west. They came to work in our archaeological sites and discover a bright base of Syrian civilization and have made many important discoveries.
Please unmute your mic.
Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. This global interest in our cultural heritage indicates the importance of this global civilization, which is characterized by diversity, richness, and depth. Next slide, please. This Syrian cultural heritage was subjected to a great injustice and destruction during the war that was waged against our country. Many archaeological and historical buildings and cities were destroyed. A number of museums were looted and illegal excavations separate in archaeological sites that were outside of the control of the state, the government, and the contents of some museums were destroyed by the terrorists. The Director General of Antiquities and Museum was able to save many of the contents of museum and archaeological sites, and its staff with the support of Syrian Arab Army worked to save many archaeological sites and archaeological finds. It's necessary to shed light on what the Hama Museum staff did to save the antiquities of and the artifacts of the Bamia Museum, where most of the artifacts were placed in iron boxes and buried in an underground pit. They were recovered after the area was liberated by the Syrian Arab Army. Many stone carving and statues dating back to the Roman era were stolen from Palmyra Museum by the terrorists and destroyed remaining. For example, I'd like to show you some slides, some photo from.
You can share your own screen. You can share your own screen if you want.
Yeah, I don't know if she's a PowerPoint. Do you see it? My PowerPoint, you don't have it, unfortunately.
No, I asked the Nigar to check, but you can continue.
I provide them in the organizer of my.
Yes. I will see with Nigar, but in waiting for that, you can continue.
Anyway, I provide you from with some photos about the Palmyra Museum sculptures and statues that destroyed by the terrorists, and some of them our staff in the Directorate General of Antiquities succeeded to transfer them to Damascus, and some of them, of course, they destroyed many of these sculptures, and after the liberated of Palmyra, we transformed all and brought all these sculptures to Damascus, and we started to restoration by help with the experts of Poland and Italian also experts joined us to restore these statues, and there are many photos. I am sorry that I couldn't show you. Anyway, I'll speak about the archaeological sites, what happened in this site. The archaeological mounds have been subject to massive illegal excavation with the aim of looting their contents. Almost all the archaeological sites that were outside the government control were subject to illegal excavation, which undoubtedly led to massive damage to these sites and to looting of hundreds of thousands of unrecorded and undocumented artifacts that are difficult to recover. I will show you some, again, I can't, I provide you many photos about this subject. There are many tales or mounts. If you see them we documented many of these sites after the liberation, after of that area, and also some sites until now under the control of the terrorist group. We also documented them by satellite photo, and you can see the site, for example, like whole many bits, thousands of bits in this site opened by and digging by the tourists to they look for the treasure, the gold and statue to take them. Regarding the site under the occupation of Turkish army, the sites also subject to the illegal excavation in which the bulldozer was often used. The Turkish army also bombed and destroyed the archaeological site of Ain Dara in Afrin region. This site go back to the 1st and 2nd millennium BC, and there are very important temple, Aramaic temple. It's dates to the 8th and 9th century BC. They destroyed this temple and this site by they bombed it before they occupied this area, and after they occupied the Afrin region, they started to destroy our tells, our mounts, by they used the bulldozer to destroy our sites. And I have many documents, and I provide the organization of UNESCO and United Nations in this document. And we, unfortunately, we didn't get any positive result. Also, after the terrorists occupied Palmyra, the city that registered on the UNESCO heritage list, they blew up, the terrorists blew up number of its ancient historical buildings dating back to the 2nd millennium until the 5th century. I mean, from the 2nd century to the 5th century AD, including the Temple of Bel, the Temple of Balshmin, the Theater, Arc de Triomphe, Citadel, and many burial towers. They destroyed.
Dr. Mahmoud, we are sharing your file, so if you want to.
Louder, please.
Yeah. We are sharing your presentation now, the photos.
Okay. Malula is a village located 56 kilometers north of Damascus. Its inhabitants are Christians who still speak the Aramaic language that Jesus used to speak. Terrorists occupied its churches, monasteries, and old town, looted its belongings, and killed many of its people. In fact, many Islamic and Christian religious buildings were subject to burning and demolition everywhere. And this is what happened to number of mosques, monasteries, and churches that fell under their control, such as the Great Mosque of Aleppo, Marilian Monastery near of Palmyra, and Sembil Monastery in Idlib region. Also the Monastery of Ma'lula and the Kabushian Church in Deir ez-Zor. Aleppo is a historical city, also registered on the UNESCO heritage list. It was occupied by the terrorists who destroyed many of its historical and archaeological buildings and destroyed part of the castle wall. There are some photos of, I provide you of old Aleppo and a sample of some buildings before and after the destruction. But after the liberation of Aleppo, the Syrian state began to restore and rehabilitate the historical buildings and markets, along with the help of the Aga Khan Culture Foundation. We also reopened Aleppo Museum with the help of the Japanese government, which was opened in 2019. After liberating a number of archaeological sites and expelling tourists from them, the Syrian Arab Army has so far found about 30,000 artifacts. We organized 3 exhibitions for a number of these recovered artifacts. Also, the Directorate of Antiquities has begun to restoration, as I mentioned already, of the statues that were destroyed in Palmyra with the help of experts from Poland, Italy, Oman, and also Russia. The Syrian state has taken care of supporting the Directorate of Antiquity to be able to restore and rehabilitate archaeological sites, buildings, and museums. But the capabilities of Syrian government, especially after the unjust economic sanctions that were imposed on our country and our people, is unable to secure what the Syrian cultural heritage needs in its various sites. Cities and museums, in terms of restoring, maintaining, and rehabilitating, it requires organized international efforts. Thank you for your attention. Of course, for example, this photo, this is a temple. This is the temple of Bel in Palmyra. This is the citadel that destroyed by the terrorist group. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. It was very sad to see this kind of picture and what happens in Syria during the war. And I am sure that our colleagues from Syria are capable of making their heritage alive again. And we learn a lot from our Syrian colleagues, especially in how we can evacuate museum collections during war. And our colleagues, we are very proud of our colleague in Syria.
Thank you.
Because there was not a lot of items looted from museums, because colleagues there take all the consideration before this armed conflict. I hope that we will see museums in Syria in a good situation in the next years. Thank you, Dr.
We have
Mahmoud.
welcome. Thank you very much again.
Okay,
thank you for
please,
everybody.
please. Okay, thank you. Please unmute your mic so as not to. Now we are going to go to Miss Zahra Beidari. She is graduated in Museum Studies from High Education Center of Cultural Heritage and Restoration of Historical and Cultural Objects from Tehran University. She is Collection Trustee Assistant and Educational Expert of Iran Art Museum. So please, floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, and you can share your presentation if you have anyone.
Hello, good afternoon, my dear colleagues and friends from all around the world. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for this opportunity, and thanks to the organizers and hosts. My topic is about the role of museum and its environment in the children's learning process, which now I'm going to start. So, in introduction, there are 3 items that I want to talk about them. But I want to begin with one golden sentence quoted by Confucius: "Learning without reflection is a waste. Reflection without learning is dangerous." So, as the first point in this slide is learning. According to behaviorists, learning is the modification of behavior as a result of experience. The child brings change in this behavior after gaining experience from the environment. After second, After second point is children's learning. All children learn through meaningful hands-on experience through touching, doing, moving, and children also learn through seeing and hearing. Then at the end, there is the role of museum in the children's learning. Museum direct learning by providing visitors with unique opportunity to explore various concepts of mathematics, art, social science. Children's learning takes place in range of formal, such as a traditional classroom, and informal setting, such as a museum program. So, what can be observed in the slide? Main questions of this research. What is the concept of the museum environment perception? How museum environment psychology can be training process for children? What about musicography is that important in the education process for children? Why children learn more when they enjoy the subject? What is the museum learning opportunity for children? How children can be encouraged and promoted to visit museum? So I want to talk about the.
Excuse me.
I want to talk.
Excuse me. Can you enlarge your screen?
Okay. Perception is a process that is located in the center of every environmental behavior. Environment can be the main source of information. Environment stimulates the whole sense of every person. All this information almost always are more than the perception of an individual. But one of the important point of this section is a role of internal and external museum environment in increasing children's cognitive, affective, healthy experience and loyalty. So in this slide illustrate the museum environmental psychology for children's learning. The environmental psychology of museum has direct impact on children's learning process. We have three items in this section: formal versus informal learning, creating a child-friendly environment, aesthetic attribute of a museum environmental experience. I want to talk about a formal versus informal learning. Learning can happen anywhere and at any time for children, intentionally or unintentionally. In the last 18 years, the term education, which is considered traditional and passive, has been being replaced by the term learning, which is thought of as active participatory, learner-centered, democratic, and accessible for children. Formal learning is internal from the learner's perspective. Is typically provided by an education or training institution. Has a specific structure such as a learning objective, specified learning time, or learning support, and is often leading to certification for children. Non-formal learning is also intentional, but typically provided outside formal settings, such as a school, university. It is a very kind of learning objectives or outcomes. Most museum learning programs and events for children, including outreach and exhibition, fall into the non-formal learning category, as they have visitors' outcomes and as more often than not, participants expect to learn something? Well, what can be seen in this slide? Museum as a learning setting, the importance of the physical environment. An environment is a living, changing system more than the physical space. It's including the way time is structured and the roles we are expected to play. Environments can be defined based on their objective, hard and quantifiable physical properties. Specific aspects of the physical environment include lighting, color, noise, air quality, and musicography. Musicography, I can talk about the musicography. Many museums go beyond text and table and use graphic elements to illustrate their educational materials. When chosen and applied carefully, graphics can add valuable context and information. When chosen poorly, graphics can confuse children and interfere with their understanding of key concepts. So, considering this slide, learning environment for children in outdoor space. Activities as playing in outdoor space with water, sand and moods that enables exploration, and collecting fallen leaves, creating living space for birds, ants, and lizards, etc. Are there necessary practices to develop a sensitive and responsible attitude toward the environment? And we need to offer such opportunity to children. It is necessary to pay attention to the following three constituents when designing children's environment. Children's perception and interpretation of the environment, the effect of the physical environment on children, the motivation behind children's environmental interactions. So, you can see in this slide learning opportunity in the museum for children. There are 4 items in this section. One of them is a provide exploration, explanation, and museum expert child interaction in museum. For example, teach a special subject in the museum for children with performance. To provide a condition to learn for children with disability, improving access and quality. For example, the museum exhibits are described from a child perspective in the booklet. Museum stories written especially for children with a developmental disability. The booklet in corporation visual message about to expect at each exhibit. 3. Create and in identifying powerful mediators of learning. For example, using the museum field trip experience as a teaching resource to enhance curriculum and students' engagement. 4. Achieve multiple result will be obtained from one learning activities. For example, learning with a digital technology in museum, science center, and galleries. So in this slide, illustrate a child-centered learning practice in museums. We have 5 items in this slide: repetition, observation, movement, music and rhythm, touching. All of them is necessary for children in a learning process in museum. the most important complementary program for children's learning in the museum. There are a lot of options for this section, but I named some of them as such as a special guideline and scenario for children's books, pantomime, so performance, signing, exhibition, workshop, design a special play for children, make a short film and animations for children, paint by children related to museum objects, make a sculpture with clay or Play-Doh, make a handmade stamp by children, hire a children expertise, presence of children in the nature of the museum, narration and story writing, make a connection the museum objects with the imagined world of children. In conclusion, in the light of what has been said so far, children's experience related to learning can be in two ways. The first one is the inclusion of activities and practice based on experiment, observation, and exploration into the curricula through which children will gain environmental experience. Secondly, when children use the museum for learning purposes, they can unconsciously get information and gain experience about the museum through observation during their activities. Museum can be a dynamic environment for children to release, to express themselves creatively. In short, the result of the studies are the impact of museum environment on children's learning process is a museum environment psychology, museum environment physical, outdoor space of a museum method and models for museum learning. Eventually, museum can provide memorable, impressive learning experience, provoke imagination, introduce unknown word and object matter, and offer unique environments for quality time with family. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, dear colleague. Please stop sharing your screen. Okay, thank you. Now we are going to the last presentation before going to the discussion. It's from our colleague, Ms. Zahra Firmani. She is a bachelor degree in history and master degree in restoration of historical monuments. She is a researcher of history and art as well as a teacher, and she is an activist of cultural museum affairs. She will give a presentation about the high potential of Sava Grand Mosque to prepare for introduction to the next generation in the world with regards to unique historical, architectural, and cultural features. So the floor is yours.
Hello, do you have my voice?
Yes, we are hearing you. And you can share your screen if you want.
Dear Nagar, please share. Greeting to all audience from all over the world. Thank you very much for including me in this presentation.
Can you see the presentation?
No.
Not yet. Not yet. Yes. No. Yes.
Thanks, Nagar. Merci. High potential of Sava Grand Mosque to prepare for introducing the next generation and the world with regard to unique historical, architectural, and culture future. Please next slide. Next. Thanks. The location of Sava and Sava City and Sava Grand Mosque. You see in this picture, the Grand Mosque, Sava location in Markazi Province and between the province of Tehran, Qazvin, Hamadan, Qom. Next, please, Nagar, before it. Thanks. According to historians, researchers say that the Sava Mosque was originally at the shrine of Sasani period, and after the arrival in Islam in Iran, fair temple were turned on the mosque, meaning that the main building of the Sava Mosque belonged to temple during the Sassanid period, and later in different historical periods, additions were added to it. However, according to the studies, the Sajjad Muazzin, a contemporary architect, has done the Sava Grand Mosque. He has to study the building the 4 main periods. Please next. Next seat. Thanks. Sava Mosque is the only mosque who purchased at the next to each other instead of facing each other. First, at the first period, the first century to the beginning to the Seljuk period of the middle in the 5th century. At the first round, addition to brick columns added to face the mosque, added the columns. At the next period, second period, half to the 5th century, the early 7th century. The second period refers to building to refers added to mosque, altar, and the decoration, and the dome at the plaster decoration. At the next period, 7th century to beginning to the 10th century, you see construction of high porch, the west side, the mosque the fourth repaired, and the brick, the columns, same mohri bricks at the beginning, making the Jampestic altar. The next seat for period early, excuse me. Early 10th century and 30th century, you see addition to Qajar period, adding to a structural transformation in Safavid periods, construction of building with the confirmed plan in the southern of the mosque, addition to Qajar, added into tilling, added into altar of the mosque. Next, please. نه من تصویر رو ندارم خودم.
It is the next slide.
Sava Grand Mosque و محراب ها رو میخوام. Sava Grand Mosque has 6 altars that between the added in different periods. There are different inscriptions of the space of Sava Grand Mosque, which some parts are decorated with the Quran verse, and some parts Islamic motif are accompanied by beading. Slide آخر. Okay, sure. In this section, we see inscription with the Actually, in this section, we need to researcher, archaeologist, and restoration, and to change section from in unstudied states. This building is very important in the national and international arena in terms of architectural, especially the placement of porch to the next order. It's hoped to the attention will be paid to the beautiful mosque and necessary measure will be taken, repair, protect it, and maintain it. So, finishing.
It is the last slide, I guess.
Okay.
Finishing
Okay,
yes.
Okay, thank you. Did you finish?
Yes, finishing.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, and thank you all for all the speakers. I checked in the chat. There is one question from our colleague from Zambia, Emmanuel Hamatwi. He's the president of ICOM Zambia. He has a general question for all the speakers. If they have training programs or restoration measures, and in which it can be a place for a collaboration. And this question is for our colleague from Palestine, Egypt, and Syria, Mongolia, and Iran. So if you have this kind of programs, please answer to the question of our colleague from Zambia.
I answered him already on the chat privately, kind of training locally, that people get this training by traveling or they learn on the job. In our museum, we have people who have trained in the ITP program with the British Museum, and other people who have received training at the Sharjah Museums Authority. They had a joint training program with the Goethe Institute. So this is an example of the training that our staff have received at the museum. Thanks.
Can I just say something? In fact, Dr. Osama is probably the most able of the Egyptian team here to answer this question, because he had run fantastic training programs. But the British Museum, with which I'm very familiar, used to run for Egyptian and for other Arab colleagues training programs, and they also made them available in the country itself. So you don't have to travel to London anymore. They can help set up training program in Zambia for our colleagues from there. So he should get in touch with them and see what they can do for them.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Shaki, I think I can, yes.
Yes.
I am Shireen from Egypt. Yes, I can answer on behalf of Dr. Osama or Egyptian colleagues. Actually, we have two kinds of training, the national training and international training. As we have colleagues from Egypt sent to British Museum in the international training and ITP programs, and in Sawa Museum Academy in Sharjah and Berlin as well. And we have a national training in the Center Department of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities in both museums and archaeological sites.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I say this? Say something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In Mongolia experience, we have the circle training from museum in national level. The National Museum of Mongolia works for this training program. Also, the universities and government Minister of Culture is the works. At the international levels, the UNESCO supported the International Museum Trainers program in a few years ago. At the moment, at the University, National University of Culture Art of Mongolia, planning to start the international program from museum workers. It's about the have to keep preserves the intangible cultural heritages at the museum. This is the very quite new perspective. You have to keep the intangible heritages in the museum. Interesting, quite modern perspective in Mongolia.
Thank you. Person, yes.
Can I speak also?
Before you respond, I have a question for you, and you can respond for both. Okay. Yes, I want to know that you have managed to reopen some museums in Syria. I want just to know how do you find the feelings of Syrian people getting back to their museums? How they feel about that?
Yeah, it's a sign of the victory. So it's everybody that was very happy when we opened the museum, and of course we organized some conference with the celebration of the when we reopened Aleppo Museum and Damascus Museum. Many foreign archaeologists participated us in this conference and this opening, and they were very happy. You know, our civilization, and it's very important for them. It's Syria, and our soil is a part of their heart, and they know the value of the Syrian soil, the Syrian land. Yeah.
Thank you. And for the second part, you can.
Yeah,
okay.
Second part, there is a good cooperation with all the organizations that interesting in the cultural heritage, like ECOM, UNESCO, etc. And there were many courses to the Syrian staff, our employees in the General Directorate of Antiquities and Museum, and they organized some course in Japan, in Poland, in Italy, in Lebanon. More than 20 Syrian employees in the DGMA get good experience in how about the restoration of the buildings, the artifacts. The result was very good, and also many experts came from Poland also to Syria and to help us in the restoration, and also give us their experience in this field.
Thank you, thank you. I think that our brother Emmanuel, can you speak a little bit about your local training program that you are trying to do in Zambia, and you can ask a question about that. Emmanuel. Okay, so Osama, do you want to say something?
Yes, Mr. Shah.
Okay. Yes.
Concerning the training and academic training, Helwan University in Cairo has a specific program for master and PhD for museum studies. I think our colleague in Syria can apply for that, and the university can hopefully offer a grant for them, as they do with the Syrians and Libyan students.
Thank you. So we have 3 more minutes. If there is no question, I have a last question for Dr. Okasha. It was at the beginning. So as he said that we are building museums in our Arab and Islamic countries in a foreign way. So how we manage as a curator to combine between our civilization, local civilization, and the functionality of the building. So how to combine between the two sections to have museums which reflects our civilization.
And this is a very good question. Again, Dr. Osama is actually better placed to answer this question from his own experience in the famous Nubia Museum in Aswan, which is a unique museum in many ways, architecturally speaking, as well as the management he put in place. It takes two to tango. It takes a good architectural team, but also the museum curators should play an instrumental part right at the very beginning. Sadly, most countries go to an architecture firm and give them a contract to build a museum, and not one single curator is being consulted for this initial process. So my advice is curators should be involved at the very initial stage of designing a museum, because they are the ones who are going to work in it, as well as the audience. We have a very good example. The Petrie Museum, we're planning to do a new museum, a new building, and we spent a whole year, an entire year, standing outside the street, giving out forms to people to fill out, in which we asked them, we're going to do a new museum. What would you like to see inside it? And how would you like to see we're doing in it? How would you like the collection to be displayed and everything? And collected all of this. So we asked all stakeholders, audiences, curators, colleagues in the university, students who are using the museums, everybody under the sun. A whole year was spent, not wasted. And we took the findings and put it on the table for the architects. And that is a fantastic example. All museums should do the same. This is how you can get a museum that is functional, it's not threatening, it is part of the community. Everybody feels we have had a hand in it. It's our museum. Sometimes you pay millions of pounds for famous architectural firms, and they have good examples, but I'm not going to mention them. And they design a fantastic building, but from the curatorial point of view, is not functioning properly, because the designer did not consult those who are going to use it, nor those who are going to visit it. So that is my short answer.
Thank you for everybody. We have some personal question in the chat. Please, speakers can respond directly to the person who are putting the question. And now we finished. We are in time. I hope that you enjoy this second day of this session, and see you tomorrow for the last session at the same time with our colleague Lamia Farsi. She is the secretary of ICOM Arab, who will be the moderator of the last day. Thank you for your attention, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
What did you say?